It was in the 60s, sorry, but that's when it was, and I was majoring in music and psych in New York. And I thought I invented music therapy because nobody really had heard about it. It was the early 60s, and so I was just going to go off and do that on my own. My original plan was to become a psychiatrist and then use music. At that time I was playing the violin, and I was going to just do that. Then inorganic chemistry showed up, and organic chemistry showed up. And I said, well, maybe I'll become a PhD psychologist instead. And then a good friend of mine told me that in the music department there was a flyer for KU, for University of Kansas, and she said, I think this is what you've been talking about. So I called Dr. Gaston, who was the head of the department at the time, and he said, you know what, finish your degree at Queens, I was at Queens College in New York, and then go to Texas Women's University for the summer, because they have double summer sessions, and between your junior and senior year, and then come here, and you'll start your master's in music therapy. So I went to Texas Women's, but they canceled all the courses because I was the only one registered, so there I was. Anyway, I ended up going to KU after my bachelor's in psych and music, and ended up getting another degree in another bachelor's degree, because at the time equivalency was like an unknown thing. So I ended up taking 3 more years of repeated courses, but I did become at that time an RMT.
That's right.
And I've loved it ever since. So there you are. That was my history.
I read a card the other day that said, the future is 100,000 threads, but the past is a fabric that can never be rewoven. So with that said, I'll try to reiterate. I actually went to Marywood for college in 1950. That was the year that they established the MAR-AMTA.
That's right.
The first profession of music therapy. I didn't know that until I was starting to read over my notes and things and get out some of these papers to find out what I did, because I just did whatever was needed. So I went to Marywood in 1950, and I received a Bachelor of Music degree in 1954, and then I decided that I had a religious vocation, which I had never had Catholic training. Well, I had training, but I didn't have Catholic education prior to Marywood College at that time. So I entered with a Bachelor of Music in Music Education. I worked in ministry for 15 years in various ministries, Mount Holly, back to Scranton, to Poughkeepsie, to wherever there was a need. Then I was sent from West Catholic High School I had a sophomore homeroom, and that was the first time that I did only music. I always had a grade besides all the music. I went to Manhattan, New York. Two classes of special education were housed in our school, and that was 1971 by that time. And I taught in St. Stephen's School on East 29th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. And I also included those 2 classes that were housed there in special education. And then 2 days a week I ran downtown to Thompson Street to St. Alphonsus High School. I had 9 general musics there and a high school glee club and all the liturgies and that. Then the congregation, they were getting requirements at Marywood. I had a master's in music education in between. Anyhow, to make it short, by the congregation to go an equivalency, take the courses that I needed for an equivalency in music therapy, because students at Marywood University were asking for a music therapy degree, and we didn't offer that. We had a wonderful music education and music performance department. So I often say I got into music therapy through holy obedience.
Sister Mariam? Sister Mariam,
We always responded to those things where there was a need, and we were just asked to go, and we went.
Hey, Sister Mariam?
Yes.
I heard a rumor about you and Sister Donna in a bathroom.
Oh, yes. Oh, right, currently I'm on you retire and you get a lot of jobs. I'm on a search committee right now at Marywood University. They called me back for this, and we've interviewed 2 clients, and now we have another one coming in next week. Anyhow, I said it was a lot easier when I opened the program in 1979. I hired Sister Donna Marie back in the bathroom. We didn't go through all of this.
That's how it works.
For 3 years, and I did the clinical part. In the meantime, I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm trying to get 40 years in 2 minutes. Anyway, I was 40 and I went to Janet Murphy, who just passed away, God bless her, at Wasaic Developmental Center after I completed the equivalency. And then I went back to New York and finished the school year, and I went to St. Joseph's Center, which was a children and maternity hospital at that time for severe, profoundly handicapped children. And I worked there for 5 years, but I also was an adjunct at Marywood University, or Marywood College at that time. I taught special ed classes, but that's how I got into music therapy. And it was through a summer workshop, actually, that I took at Peabody University in Baltimore with Dr. Richard Graham, who's also passed away. So aware of that. You people have a lot to do to continue the programs, and I'm sure you will. We went through a lot of the growing pains and a lot of the giving birth to new concepts in the certification board especially. So that's how I got into music therapy. I'm a little bit off on it, but that was basically it. And Donna Marie Sister Donna Marie was just wonderful, and she was unable to come. We were hoping that she'd be able to be on this panel, but she's unable to be there, so, that's a kind of a cute story of her hiring her in the bathroom. We did go through a few other things.
Where did hey, Sister Mary, where did you, Ryan Hunter asked, where did you do your equivalency?
My
for music therapy?
I did with Dr. Graham. Well, I did the first 2 years. I had a master's in music education. So I went to Duquesne University and took, with Dick Gray, actually, who's another pioneer in the field. Yep. I took Intro to Music Therapy in a summer and anthropology, which I needed. I had a lot of psychology. I went back to Marywood, took abnormal psychology, and then I went and took the rest of the core music therapy courses in a semester down at the University of Georgia with Dr. Graham. He really kept in touch with me. He liked what I was doing with the students in New York City. We shared a lot of that as music educators. His workshop was for music educators in 1973, something like that. I got my RMT in 77.
And then you started Marywood, the program, in 79?
And then I worked on that. I was both at St. Joe's. I started the program at St. Joe's in music therapy. There was nothing in northeastern Pennsylvania. I was the only therapist here, the only music therapist in the whole area. And we had the nerve to open that. But students were asking for it at that time. It was the very beginning.
Yep.
I met Helen Bonney when she moved to this region. She had been on the West Coast, and she had been in Kansas, which is where she was from. And she moved to Mid-Atlantic region, and I don't know if you remember when she first started, we were trying to really welcome her, and I was on the executive board at that point. And so after she was introduced, I went up to her and I said, well, we're here to help you and get you settled, and if there's anything that we can do to help you, let me know. And have any of you met Helen? Or no, too bad. Okay.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I know you have.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she had this kind of way about her, and she said, well, dear, you could come to a workshop I'm giving in New York City. And I can't, my children are young, they were 2 and 4, I have a job, I can't take the time off, and I don't have the money. And she said, well, dear, I'll give you a scholarship. So I was like now embarrassed, basically, and mortified. So I said, okay, I'll come. And it was a Saturday, Sunday, and for me, by 11 o'clock on Saturday, I knew this was what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. It just really hit me very powerfully. And I went back up to the desk and I said to her, I want to train in this. And this was in 78. So training in GIM started in 75. So again, it was really pretty new. And I said to her, I want to train in this. And she said, this is so quintessential, Helen. She said, well, yes, dear. That's why I invited you here. So, with the children being small, I went back and forth to Baltimore. I was living in New York at that time and teaching at Hofstra and had a clinical practice and raising a family. And I went back and forth to Baltimore, back and forth. And I've never looked back. It's, to me, what I was looking for always when I was, working in music therapy. That was the next step that I always felt I wanted. It's grown. You asked, like some of the history of GIM. It started really small, and Helen figured it would be, at the beginning, she would take almost anyone into training, because most people thought she was either crazy or a witch, and I mean that literally. They were frightened of the work she was doing. Nobody was talking about transpersonal work at that time. One of the people, I was on the National Executive Board. That's where Brian and I met when I was council coordinator. And people on the National Executive Board came up and said they were concerned about my health, my mental health. And they said, we're worried because you've always been so sensible, and now you're with that woman, and we're worried that you're having a breakdown. And I said, no, not so much. I'm still okay. And of course, then they thought that I was having a breakdown because I thought I was okay. So there was no way out of that at all. And over the years, like Nordoff and Robbins, like the new pioneers, people began to see that this was maybe an alternative way of doing music therapy. In those days, it was that. You were trained to do anything with any population in any way. And KU at that time, they say it was behavioral. I never got that from KU, so I don't know what kind of mindset I was in, but it was not a time for transpersonal work. It's grown now, it's international. I mean, it's now accepted. There are still places in the United States, not so much Europe or the other countries or continents, but there are still people here who feel that it is not work that should be done, that we have no right to be doing it, but that number is shrinking. And, as transpersonal psychology is growing in the forefront of people's minds. So I just love it. I started working with children with autism now on the spectrum. I mean, the names have changed over the last 50 years, but and I ended up going back working with children because I missed it. But pretty much from the 70s on, I've been doing GIM, and I love it. It's just, it's my way. Lots of other ways are just as valid, just as good, and God bless you, go ahead and do it. This is where I belong, so that's what I've been doing.
Cool. Does anyone have any questions about GIM or, you know, for Maddy?
I just might want to respond to the comment you said about that coming forward at the times that the KU was thought to be strictly behavioral, but you didn't see that. And I would concur that neither Gaston nor Sears were, quote, dyed in the wool behaviorists by
No,
any
they
stretch
were
of the
not.
imagination. And
I
yet
think it
that
was bad
perception-
press.
I think that perception lingers to this day, interestingly enough.
Yeah, I know Helen went to KU at the same time that I did, but we didn't know each other well then. We had met, but we didn't really know each other till she came east. And she was told that she couldn't do any of that mystical stuff. That's the story she tells, that Gaston said, you know, you can't do any of that mystical stuff while you're here. We're behavioral. But I never got that. So it's interesting. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
And I was trained in Queens College. It was either Freud or Skinner. They were the only two people in psychology at that time. You didn't get anything else. So I knew
There wasn't
behaviorism.
anything else.
No.
There wasn't anything else to get.
No, so, you know, they talked about Jung, who was kind of a crazy student of Freud's. Don't pay any attention to him. But I'm glad. That's nice to hear, because I keep fighting that misconception of KU.
Well, all we have now is what they wrote. If you go back and look at what they wrote, you don't
Yeah.
get to that.
No,
What is KU? Which university? is
University of Kansas.
that? Okay.
And Dr. Gaston was the head of the department at that time, and Bill Sears also was in that
Sears,
department,
yeah.
and he was not behaviorist either, so I don't get it.
So they, you know, so were they Freudian or humanistic, or what was the?
Well, I would say
I would
Sears
say-
was humanistic.
Humanistic, yeah.
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 Gaston was on the cusp of, I would say, medical humanistic. I think
He
he
was
would have
medical.
loved,
Yeah.
Medical,
he
yeah,
would have loved the move into the medical music therapy, I think.
yeah.
Maddy, what year you talking about? Is that
I-
early 70s?
No, thank you. No, I finished KU in '69. I started in '67 at
It
KU.
was in the 70s that you started in GIM? Was that?
GIM I started in '78.
So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Piaget was around and Piaget.
yeah,
He was
Jay,
just,
yeah.
because I remember in college, I was,
But they were more humanistic.
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Well, there was
no.
that.
Developmental, yeah.
Developmental, yeah. Yeah, it was, I'll just, little piece of personal history. My daughter now is finishing her master's in music therapy. I'm very excited. After 20 years not being a music therapist. Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? Lizzie is now. Okay. Liz, okay. Anyway, she is finishing her master's, and I look at the coursework and the clinical work that she is getting, and part of me is jealous, and part of me is ecstatic. You have no idea what you've got here in the trainings. We were flying, and you too, we were flying by the seat of our pants most of the time. No practicum. I mean, at KU, I don't know, when you went, we had to do practicum. It was volunteer work, and if you didn't do it, you could fail. But there was no established practicum, no music therapist around to guide you. It was,
Well, the model that Richard Graham was using at the University of
I was Janet Murphy's second intern,
Well, the
and I was 40.
the model that Graham was using at the University of Georgia, at the University of Georgia, he very much believed in was he taught the coursework, and the internship was the clinical experience. The clinical experience. The only clinical experience. You did the coursework and you went to internship, and that was the clinical exposure internship. So we've come a long way.
Yeah, that's when you find out if it works or not.
at KU, we had to do, did you have to do this too? Because you went through so much longer, but we had to do a 3-month psychiatric internship
Well, in those days,
before our 6-month.
right.
Supposedly, had I been going for a normal degree, it would have been between junior and senior year, but I was, equivalency master's thing. So that was a 3-month full-time psychiatric internship, ward staff. That's what you were. No music, no nothing. And then your 6-month internship. But that, I don't think they're doing that anymore, are they? No, I didn't think so. Things have changed for the better, a lot for the better.
Yeah, moving in that direction. And
I trained 3 therapists too as a clinical training director when I was at St. Joseph's Center. After I got my RMT and worked there for a couple of years. And went to Carbondale, which is 16 miles from St. Joe's, and actually worked with adults with various disabilities and special classes. There was a special class there in the Human Service Center, which was beyond the 83 that I had, that I gave music therapy to at St. Joseph's. And I've taught at Marywood. I taught 1 course there as well.
Before you started. Hey, we have another question. Yeah.
Hi, this is for anybody and kind of a general question because it sounds like the very beginnings of music therapy, there was a lot of like space and for like new techniques and new things to happen, but also less like kind of guidance and so it's like that. How is it contrasted now, where there's like lots of maybe more established things, but potentially, I don't know, less room for innovation? I don't know. I don't know. I'm just sort of asking.
I don't think there's less room for innovation. I think you are far better prepared than any of us older people were. I think we learned by doing, but I think for me the lesson is, and I got this as well from Helen, here's where we started and here's where we are, and it's up to you to come up with the new innovations, the new directions, to be the innovators. We don't have a whole lot of them in this current generation. Our innovators now are either passed away or that those schools are accepted now. So I would say the opportunities are there and your preparation to explore is there, but it's your responsibility to take the reins and say, this idea really intrigues me. And pardon me, come hell or high water, sorry, I'm going to go in that direction, and I'm going to dare, I'm going to risk. Because if we don't have risk takers, our profession is going to stay static. So I think you're better prepared to do that innovation than we ever were.
Well, and I think evidence of that is, as far as creativity is, we've got neurologic music therapy, all those things have been developed by individual people who had a theory, and now, music for the caregivers coming, and and the stuff with hospice, all that is innovative. So I think that will go on.
It's happening.
It's up to you.
Making history in the moment, as you speak. Cool.
Well, and again, contrasting the fact that initially, in the early years, you had to do your internship in psych. If you wanted to do anything else, you did that afterwards. But it had to be in psych.
Well, that's what they knew. Because that's where
that's where the practice
was.
Yeah.
Right. So, come a long way since those days.
You were talking about being perceived as like a witch or like the mystical. Do you think now, like, who is the witches of now? and like, do you think that there's now a more planned out way for bringing those things in or vetting them or something? Or do you think there's a need for it? Or
I think there's a need for it. I think that many innovators would be considered crazy or offbeat or witches or detrimental, because anytime you're outside the box, you run the risk of being outside the box. And that, for people who want to hold on to the status quo, that's difficult. It's like, that's not how we do it here. And you have to take the risk to do what you believe in. Is it more accepted? I think it is, because we do have NICU. We do have the whole medical move. Gaston was talking about a medical music therapy in the 60s, but it didn't happen until somebody took the reins and said, that's the direction I'm going in. All of these new areas, I think they are more accepted. I don't know. I guess I would have to ask you if the transpersonal move is more accepted. It certainly is in the general psych field. I mean, it's like, if you're going to treat the person, the whole person has to be treated. It can't, you can't just segment a person. And in music therapy, we don't. It's our whole purpose is to be holistic. I don't know what your experiences are with a wacky idea that's come to fruition. I'd say go for it.
There have been instances where the organization did not support people who were innovators.
Oh,
For better-
absolutely not.
I just mentioned to Brian
Yeah.
quietly, and then Charles Eagle, Campbell,
Yeah?
with the Mozart, the listening. So they were kind of pushed out and not embraced, and that happens with innovation.
Yeah, Paul Nordo
Nordo
from
Robbins were
yeah,
ostracized.
Clive Robbins went through the same kind of personal trouble that Helen went through, and they had a lot of conversations about, how do we move this? How do we move this into the general population?
But I think that's why the
Yeah.
and not
AMT. Yep.
happened, because
Yeah.
there's a schism, of number one, how you should be trained, and also on theory,
Yep.
Yeah,
theoretical.
Yeah.
But the AAMT trained during, that was their bailiwick, wasn't it, to train during the bachelor's degree? Didn't you do then you didn't really do an internship separately?
Well, it was more incorporated, but it wasn't entirely separate, but it was more tied to the school and the curriculum.
Right.
But they-
This specific school.
they didn't have a bachelor's. They shortly went to master's only.
No, not NYU. did.
NYU,
Yeah, NYU.
Oh,
did.
I'm sorry, I
NYU
was-
did.
yeah.
Well, NYU's only ever been
masters,
masters.
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So yes, that was their model for quite a while until
Yeah.
there was another school. It
Yeah.
would have been simple.
And there are a lot of different professions that feel that the learning has to be interwoven with the clinical work, and that was their philosophy, was that you should be doing clinical work as you're learning, whereas we had the schooling and then the internship, and it was a different philosophy.
You got your
And Brian
degree.
knows it took a lot of work to get those two
Yeah.
together.
That's a.
The MAMT was established in 1950. They had the registered music therapist established in 1956. That's 6 years. Now it's moving along quite a bit faster, and at that time, the MAMT president, Roy Underwood, announced the formation of a certification committee to study the registration of music therapists. And it wasn't required at that time to have a national board exam. And that's what I got called in to do in 1980, was to be on the first certification board, which was quite an undertaking. And I think the 70s was a big time for music therapy. But I do think that everything takes patience. The growing pains that we went through with that first certification board, which I sat on, I was secretary for meetings that were like 4 or 5 days. And we had also, the NAMT committed quite a bit of funds to hire an actual testing firm to get the certification, the national certification exam. We had no exam, you just had to fulfill your requirements in an approved school, which took a lot of work too, all the accreditation bodies and all the rest that you have to go through. By 1960, the rule was that the registrants must have completed the 4 years of college degree in music therapy in order to apply for the designation of the RMT. And then from there, we picked up during the 70s and 80s, which I just said. And the profession was growing and becoming quite active as it began to evolve finally. but there was so much patience even with accepting the NAMT created the certification board, but it was because what was happening in the healthcare at the time. In 1971, the same year that the AAMT was formed, seemed to have been a turning point in the healthcare field. When the Departments of Health and Education and Welfare declared a moratorium on professional regulations, that meant your certification. There was a little uniformity in the standards which health agencies employed, and that attested to the competencies of the professionals who were certified. And I think all of those things came about, and the way back when Margaret Sears was the executive director out in Kansas, all this took place. And at the same time that they created the certification board for music therapy, who put the exam together and that, all this was happening in the field of healthcare. And as a result, in 1971, the federal government kind of created the NCHCA, the National Certification of Health Certifying Agencies, which was, and they also had a membership where you, an associate membership, and then when you got your exam together, then they gave you, when you applied with all of, writing eons, then they awarded us with the Class A membership in the NOCA. It was like the NASM that all of you are familiar with probably in school systems.
And by us,
Sister
Mariam, and by us, what you mean is CBMT, not individuals. You're talking about the organization was an official member of that group.
Okay, yep, and so that was the first exam, you were on that committee, that board, and are there any, how, did you take the exams, you've taken the board certification, how is that, any questions about the exam, or how was that?
Well, I took the first one, but I'll save that story for later.
Well, the NCHCA was formed to raise the quality and lower the cost of health services delivered in the United States. And underlying the Commission's efforts was the concept of competence, and that's where now we have competence. We have domains that you can go to and find out what you actually do need to be competent. And I think an awful lot of that work has to do with meeting people, teaching, the experiences that you have, as well as all the studies. But those 1,200 hours of clinical is really very crucial, I think. And also, I think that the grounding part in the bachelor's gives you the skills in music that you need. Music is your medium. And I really feel that gives you the foundation that you need to go on and specialize in the master's program. And if they want to make that the entrance level, that's fine. In the commission, the emphasis was on competence. And as a result of that, that's why we, the people that were pioneers along with Maddy and myself and Brian and many people sitting there before us, I think that they had a lot to do with it at the beginning. And I just happened to be asked to serve for the Mid-Atlantic region on that very first board. And it was quite a learning experience, but we learned so much from the testing firm as far as test questions, as far as writing questions. They went all over at the different conferences, and they did a survey, of course, all of the things you have to do to put a real legal test together. I think that was a great experience. It certainly was a learning experience for all of us. And it was growing pains, for sure. It was like giving birth to a new baby.
Yeah.
The pains that we endured. I didn't know it for years and years later, but well, Judy Jellison was the very first chair of the board. We only had 6 RMTs on the board. And of course, we were always open. I really feel that the board had something to do with our unification that came later. There were so many good things happening in the field. I was very passionate about it. The change of the national office from Kansas came to Washington at almost the same time as the certification board was being created with a testing firm.
And Sister Mary?
Many things. The movement into Washington, going with a firm, Bergman firm, to run the organization, you know. It was just a lot of things were happening there.
That's definitely.
What do you wish someone had told you when you were starting out as a young professional?
Well, I'm going to quote Helen. I've never been asked that question before, but I think my feeling is we have a tiger by the tail. And she always said that about GIM. I think that music therapy, as broad as it's become and as innovative as it's become, we still haven't scratched the surface. There are many population settings, approaches that are still to be discovered. And I think we have the tiger by the tail. And you better hold on. I don't know if you can ride it. I don't know if you want to try and tame it, but you better know that this is something that's really blossoming. And it's a powerful process. And I'd say that's what I tell people. Go in there and know it. And embrace it.
But you people are well prepared now. I mean, thank God. And don't forget those people that worked so hard and patiently to bring us to this point. You know, Maddy was the president. I was the president of the MAR. I was on the assembly for 30 years, the national plan. And it's just, you have to be dedicated. And it's a great joy for me to know that 3 of my former students are presenting at this conference.
Great. That's what we got to carry the torch and keep us moving forward. Thanks everybody for coming today.
Yes,
Fireside Chat.